I'm assuming everybody can hear me. I just have to go do a couple of things in terms of posting URLs. If you can't hear me when I am speaking now, please let me know. Drop a message into the sidebar or whatever, and let me know. But if you can hear me, that's fine. All right. Couple of things in terms of posting you. Oh, piddle. Sorry, it's being complicated. I'll be there. It's deliberately thwarting me. You thwarter, you. Okay, now I'm listening to myself again, and that's too scary for words. Okay. Okay. Success, or at least success of a sort. Okay, now we're all caught up. Hello. Good evening, and welcome back. Happy Sunday, at least for me. I'm going to be dealing with a very slight lag on my end. I hope you're not dealing with a lag on your end. Um, if so, I'm not exactly sure what I can do with it as a kind of an early Halloween present for all of you. As if the year has not been scary enough, I got a webcam so you can see me even more horrifyingly clearly. But I haven't got my new microphone yet, so we'll have to just see how the sync lines up. At the moment, it's not syncing, but what the hell? I can only do what I can only do. So there we are, and let's see who's here. Jared's here. Hello, Jared. Hello, Sandra. Hello, Bert. Hello, Brandon. Hello, Barban. And Alexis. Yo. Kelly. Hello, Kelly. Hello. And Ronnie. Hello, Ronnie. Wouldn't normally see this live, but I'm up watching my Packers on Sunday Night Football. Well, that's all right. You're welcome anyway. Even Packers fans. No, I like the Packers. Anyway, especially because of Aaron Rodgers, who's a Bay Area lad. Debbie, yes, hello. Timothy, hello. Jason and Greg, hello. Emily, hello. Angie, hello. Elliot, and Pamela. So good evening, good afternoon, whatever to all of you. And as I said, if there's a lag or if the whatchamacallit is a little weird, I apologize. It's just as well you can just close your eyes and listen to my not quite mellifluous voice and spare yourself from having to look at my grisly, frightening features. Anyway, so we are at Sunday evening now, and we are going to be reading more of the book. Anything I need to talk to you about first? I 2 o'clock in the morning, I gave everybody the basic update, which is nothing new to report particularly. We're all doing okay here. Everybody is struggling with different things. At our house in particular, we're doing okay. And I wanted to send special greetings out to all of you who have waded through your Sunday and gotten to this point and have joined me. It's always nice to have you. Let's see, anything else to talk about? No, just the normal stuff. Nothing really important. Okay, good. No lag on that end. Good. Well, I've got a little lag on my end, but it doesn't really matter because I already know what I look like when I'm talking in sync, I guess. Anyway, what else? Cat's here, right, Lily? Hello, baby. And everybody else is upstairs eating takeout pizza or delivery pizza. So it's just you and me and the cat. And I'm going to read from The Heart of What Was Lost. For those of you, this is my actual work desk I'm sitting at. So, of course, inevitably, I'm wading through all kinds of crap just trying to find things like the book. But here's the book. We are just starting part 2 of the book. And just a quick update for those of you who just joined us for the first time or something. This is a story that takes place between, you don't need to see my name, between To Green Angel Tower, or as Ilva pointed out to me, and of course humiliated me on my live continent-to-continent hookup. It's not actually after the events of To Green Angel Tower. It's after the events of the regular story, but before the events of the afterword of To Green Angel Tower. So yes, Ilva, once again, you've proven me a complete dunderhead about my own work. Now, that's why I have friends like that who can tell me what actually happens. Anyway, so this book is about the chasing of the Norns, the Hikedaya, the white-skinned fairies, for lack of a better word, back to the north by mortals led by Duke Isgrimnur, who is, of course, a very well-known character in the original trilogy, and his soldiers. So you see Isgrimnur and Sludig, who's another character from To Green Angel Tower in those books. But you also see 2 new characters, Porto, a slightly older soldier, or at least a young adult soldier, and Endry, a very young soldier, who are traveling with the Duke, even though they are not Rimmersmen, as most of the Duke's soldiers are. And we also spend time with Vieki and his master, Yarike. And Yarike is the head of the Builder's Order, and Vieki is his subaltern, or whatever you acolyte. Yeah, it's his assistant. Lower down the pecking order. We have the Norns, who are trapped in Tangleroot Castle, have just been essentially rescued by, among other things, the arrival of General Sunoku, who is a very, very, very much revered and general for the Norns. And between her and a trick played by Vieki, or thought of by Vieki, they have managed to escape from Isgrimnur and his mortals, and they are now fleeing north again towards Nakiga, their home, which they are very frightened about because so many Norns, so many Hikedaya were lost during the war, but they still hope they can get back and have enough left to defend it. So that was what was going on at the end of the first part. The other developments were one of Isgrimnur's lieutenants, a man named Brinder, his son, was captured by the Norns and was set on fire, among other things, and so died horribly. And anything else? Oh, and before that happened, Yarike, the magister of the Builders, the Norns, Builders Order, took Vieki aside and showed him a gem called the Heart of What Was Lost, and said, essentially, this is the most valuable thing. This actually comes from the garden, the old country. And so if anything happens to me, I am charging you, on your honor to return this to my family, because it's the most valuable thing we have. So that's what's going on there. Excuse me, I'm trying not to sneeze because I think I got cat dander. But I'm worried if I turn my fan on, you may hear it in the background. Oh well, such is life. Anyway, so we have just finished the end of part one, and we are now beginning part two. And the first chapter is called Three Ravens Tower, which I now begin. Oh, and the other voice that you hear, as you're just about to hear here, is the voice of one of the official chroniclers of the Hikedaya, who's writing about this self-same set of incidents, but presumably from a time slightly in the future. So, and that's the first part. That's Lady Miga, but I don't think she's credited here, but it's Lady Miga is writing about this, and it's for official consumption by the Norns, so it's somewhat propagandized history. Three Ravens Tower. As all Hikedaya know, when the children of our nobility reach the proper age, they are submitted to Yadade's box. And the way in which they escape the box, or the way that they fail, determines their path in life. When she was put to her test, the young Sunoku, Sate Iora, broke free so swiftly that none present could remember any other child who had performed the feat so well. Thus it was later for Sunoku as general. When no one else could have broken the siege at Tangleroot Castle, she led a small force there to save those trapped in the ruins, and then fought her way out again, scattering the Northmen before her like chaff before a reaper's blade. The rest of the besieged followed her, awed by her courage and skill, and when the trap was behind them, she led them all north toward the shelter of the city walls. The walls had been built during the time of our greatest power, when the Zidaya still held Azua, when much of Nakiga still existed outside the great mountain, and the north was ours. But as our numbers diminished and the Northmen came across the cold sea and began their career of destruction through the lands of the Kedaya, at our great queen's order, we fell back into the sheltering fastness of the mountain, and eventually Nakiga that was stood deserted. Slowly, the trees and grasses and the fierce winds began to take back the outer city. The great walls, a vast ring of stone that stretched for leagues around our mountain, fared little better. In the time of Sulen, the 13th celebrant, the order of sacrifice removed the last guards from the walls, calling them back to the city to better protect Nakiga itself and the irreplaceable person of Queen Utuku. It's a cat in the background. So it was that Sunoku and the rest of her charges, fleeing ahead of the mortal invaders, came at last to the Tower of Three Ravens, and found it in a pitiable state. The tower itself gutted and long empty, the great walls it guarded now perilously weak. Although Lord Yarike, Magister of Builders, was with her, there was little that his small number of workers could do to make repairs with the Northmen so close behind. Still, the Hikedaya were determined to make a stand there, trusting in Sunoku's generalship to keep the mortals from the mountain, and from Nakiga itself as long as could be managed. In the city, nothing was yet known of General Sunoku's mission, and after she took the largest part of the surviving warriors with her, the caverns of Nakiga were silent with foreboding, the queen's subjects fearful of what might come next if the invaders continued unchecked. They were right to fear. Overburdened with the Duke's own considerable weight, his horse nearly lost its footing on the steep track, sliding back a short distance in a flurry of gravel and scree. His Grimner reined up, eyeing the looming cliffs on either side with distaste. "Tell me again how you know they are not lying in ambush for us," the Duke said. The scout nodded. "There has been no movement that we've seen, Your Grace. I think the fairies are too few now. They're all hiding in the tower, I'd say. Come, my lord, it's just a little way more to the spot where we will make camp." His Grimner snorted. "Too few fairies. Don't ever assume that, lad. especially when we've followed them into their own lands. My men and I found high ground to keep watch, my lord. We can see beyond this wall all the way to their cursed mountain. This time we would see any reinforcements long before they arrived. Just a little farther, my lord. Isgrimner looked back on the line of mounted men making their slow way up the pass behind him, Sludig nearest, following like a faithful hound, then Brindur and his Skoggy men, with Earl Vigri and the Elvertsala men close behind leading a train of foot soldiers. 2,000 able-bodied men left, at most. Could he really take such a small force into the forbidden lands of the Norns and hope to come out again in one piece? But that doesn't matter, does it? Isgrimner thought. What matters is that we leave none of the fairies alive to threaten our lands again. If we can manage that, whatever befalls us, it would be a sacrifice worth making. He thought of his wife, Gutrin, waiting for him not at Elvertsala, but far to the south, in the devastation of the Hayholt. She would be busy, he knew, with wounded men and women to care for, and the new king and queen in need of her counsel and wisdom. At least she would have something to distract her from their lost son. Isgrimner himself had spent too many nights under these cold, starry northern skies, too pained to sleep, trying to think of ways things could have been different, that they could have beaten back the enemy without losing their son, Izorn. Wars don't end, he thought suddenly. They become stories told to children. They become causes that are taken up by those who were not even born when the war started, but they don't end. We are a fierce race, we men. We will give up even our short, precious lives for revenge. No, for justice. No wonder the immortals fear us. The steep track angled to one side, following the line of the pass. As they came out from behind a massive cliff wall, Isgrimner could suddenly see all the way to the top, to the darkening sky and the great dark wall that girdled all of the Norn lands. It stretched 30 ells high across the top of the pass, a thing of monstrous black slabs laid flush one on another as though by the work of some gigantic mason. In the middle of the pass, squarely above the climbing road and a gate that had long since been filled in with even more stone, a tower bulged out from the wall. The entire structure seemed oddly proportioned to Isgrimner's eye, but the tower's crown was one of the strangest things he had ever seen, with 3 beak-like projections, the middle pointing forward and the others angled to either side, each one hanging out 10 cubits or more beyond the wall. He thought the tower looked more like some huge weapon than a mere building, a battle mace for a sky-tall giant. Sweet Elysia, mother of mercy, he said. Sludig had reined up beside Isgrimner. He looked as though he had bitten into an apple and discovered half a squirming worm. This is an evil place. Another voice said, Evil is in what mortals and immortals do. The place itself is but a place. Ayaminu, the Sitha woman, rode up beside them on her own horse, which, despite its fine-boned slenderness, seemed to have less trouble with the cold and the steep climbs than the Rimmersman's mounts, bred in cold northern lands. Once it was a point upon the teeming earth like any other. Does this abomination have a name? Asked Isgrimner. That. She made one of the barely perceptible gestures that passed for a shrug among her kind. It is called Three Ravens Tower. You see the beaks, of course. They allowed the defenders to drop stones or hot oil or other even less pleasant things upon anyone trying to take the wall. Isgrimner had not come to like the Sitha woman's company any better during the Sennight they had pursued the Norns from Tangleroot Castle. He had found all the Sithi he met difficult to understand and even more difficult to parley with. And he found their reluctance to engage with their murderous cousins even more frustrating. But if the immortals Jiriki and Aditu had been frustrating and their mother Likimea close to maddening, Ayaminu made those three seem easy company. Despite accompanying the Duke's troop and offering an occasional bit of information, Ayaminu seemed otherwise unconcerned by the doings of the mortals or even their deaths, and did not seem to care at all whether they ever caught the Norns, who had brought so much ruin to her own people as well as his Grimners. Many times he had wondered whether they harbored some kind of spy in their midst, though the men he had set to watch her had seen no evidence of any treachery. "Do you think the Norns are guarding it?" he asked now. "Or are they hurrying back to Stormspike Mountain?" "They will defend this pass," she said. "They have no choice. Do you see what has happened to the wall on the right side of the tower?" His Grimner squinted, but in the fading twilight it was hard to make out much beyond the high wall's shadowy, massive presence. "No, my eyes are not like a Scythian's. Speak plainly." "A very few years ago, just before the beginning of the Storm King's War, the earth shook here, a great writhing of the ground that threw down many parts of the wall around Nakiga that was, including that section beside the tower. If you look closely, you can see that the tower itself tilts slightly to one side." "I see no sign of the wall having collapsed." "Because repairs were done, but they were hasty. My people sent a number of our families to help them. This was before the Hikadaya moved openly against us, but Queen Utuku still refused our offer. We know, though, that the repairs were over swift, most likely because the Queen's eye was turned southward to the lands of men." "Over swift? What do you mean?" This was Brindur, who had joined the impromptu council. "I may not have your damnable fairy eyes, but they look solid enough to me." As always, Ayaminu seemed unperturbed by insults. Yes, the stones were piled up once more with as much skill as could be rendered, but not all the rituals were observed or the proper things done. The queen was keeping her holy singers busy then, preparing the way for the Storm King's return. We can all be grateful they failed at that, but also that they were so gravely occupied by it, because the words of binding and other necessary cantrips were not sung here. The wall is weak. It can be breached with nothing but force. "What else would we use?" Brindur demanded. "Trickery, like your accursed breed?" Isgrimner spurred his mount between the furious Rimmersmen and Ayaminu. An argument with their one source of knowledge was a bad idea, and the Scytha woman had seldom offered this much help before. "Please, explain," Isgrimner said to her. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said. You have force. You have implements of war and siegecraft, like your great battering ram. The wall is weak there, and the rituals that would have made it all but impervious had not been performed. The tower itself was damaged by the shaking earth, and the wall was badly weakened." She looked up the pass to the spiky shape of Three Ravens Tower. "You will lose men. The Hikadaya will fight fiercely, but if you wish to pass the walls of their lands, this is the place it can be done." "And why should we trust you?" Brindur snarled. "You have not seen fit to offer such useful advice before. Why now? And why could you not have told us that another Norn army was coming down upon us at the ruins?" Ayaminu only looked at him blandly. "I knew nothing of that army. The Hikadaya are aware of my presence, I promise you, Northmen. They take pains to keep their plans hidden." Isgrimner was not to be distracted from the matter at hand. "But are you certain now? Could they be keeping something else from you?" "Of course. But what I tell you is true. You could ride along this wall until the season changed and not find a more vulnerable spot." "You see my dilemma, don't you?" Isgrimner frowned. "I have the safety of several thousand men in my hands. Can you promise me success? Now the Sithis showed emotion for the first time, a faint twisting of the lips. I can promise you nothing, Dukas Grimner. Many men will die. So will many Hikedaya. Any one of us may suffer that fate at any time, and a battle between desperate enemies will not make the chances less. But if you wish to pass the wall and enter the lands around Nakiga, if you truly mean to take the city itself, then you can find no better spot. That is all I have to say. The decision is yours. Look, we have reached the camp. Endry, did you hear me? We are here. The younger soldier had not been badly hurt during the Norn's escape, but like Porto himself, he had been overwhelmed with a terrible, pressing weariness afterward, and had spent most of his time on the back of Porto's horse, sliding in and out of troubled sleep. Endry? Can we stop now? Yes, that's what I said. See, the fires are lit. In fact, I smell food cooking. The sun, unnaturally late in the sky this far north, had only just disappeared, although midnight was surely not far away. The camps, set up well out of range of even the strongest bowshot from the looming walls, nestled in the shelter of the thick, snow-mantled pines on either side of the steep canyon. As Porto reined up, he took a brief look at the beaked tower, which squatted against the purple-blue sky like some horrid heathen idol from the primeval days before the ransomer was sent to mankind. Come on, lad, he told his companion, deliberately turning his back on the tower. We don't want to miss whatever supper is left. I am famished. For the last stretch of the climb, Porto had been forced to watch the tower loom larger with each moment, and despite his words to Endry, he found that the thing he wanted just now, more than food or even drink, was to find a spot where he could not see the tower at all until night finally hid it from view completely. It seemed to be watching them. He could almost imagine that their puniness, their mortal insignificance, actually amused it. When they had found a fire and were scooping the last congealing bits of stew out of the cooking pot, Endry suddenly looked up. Porto? What, lad? I can't remember the way home. What do you mean? I can't remember the roads we took, or how we got here. I couldn't find my way back again. Don't leave me. Porto looked at the other men around the fire, mercenaries from Naban and Pedruin, and a scrawny, hard-muscled veteran of Joshua's Erkenlandish army, wondering what they would make of the young man's neediness. Not one of them even looked up from their bowls. What do you mean? Porto asked him quietly. I'm not going to leave you, lad, I promise. I can't even remember the road to my own house. You remember it, don't you? You've been to Harborside. I know you have. Porto shook his head. Been there? I've been trying to rid myself of that memory for years, he said, hoping to jolly the younger man out of his mood. You should thank the saints to have lost it. Dreadful place. Not a patch on the rocks. No jokes, Porto. Endry was staring intently at him now, his eyes showing a touch of panicked white around the edges, made all the more eerie by the flickering firelight. I don't want jokes. Promise me that when it's over, you will show me the way home. We will go together. Porto did his best to keep his voice light, though he was almost as beaten down by these dark, frightening lands as Endry. He sometimes thought that if he did not have the boy to watch over, he might already have deserted to head back south, risking wolves and wild giants and all the other dangers. We'll all go home then. You, me, these fellas here, and old Dukas Grimner leading the way. People will line up along the roads to cheer us. The men who finally defeated the Norns, they'll shout. And you won't need anyone to show you the way, because your people, my wife and son, they'll all be waiting to welcome us home. Endry stared at him for a long moment without saying anything. his face still wild. Around his neck was his red and white harborside scarf, grimy now with mud and matted with pine needles. The young soldier reached up and touched it, and his expression softened. His eyes blinked. "Of course," he said, "of course. Thank you. You are a good friend." "If I am a good friend, then why are you letting the wineskin sit by your knee while I die of thirst? Pass it here." Endry handed it over, and Porto took a long draught. It was sour and tasted strongly of oak, from one of the last and smallest of the barrels the army had carted north from the Yistrian brothers' vineyards. But at the moment it was all he wanted. It tasted like salvation. It tasted like home. A feeling of something close to security had stolen over Vieki since he and the rest of the Hikedaya had reached Three Ravens Tower. He knew it was foolish. In truth, the danger grew greater by the moment, not just to themselves, but to their entire race. If some miracle beyond foresight did not occur, the mortal army outside would follow them to Nakiga if it could, take their race's last city, and destroy Vieki's people, murdering every last woman, man, and child as though they were vermin. But even with the knowledge of the horrors that were surely to come, he felt better than he had since the terrible moment when the Storm King had been defeated and the great tower had fallen in Erkenland, crashing down in smoke and dust and the last flickers of magical flames, taking with it all the people's hope of making the land theirs once more. In fact, at this instant, Vieki felt almost ordinary, as though the last horrible months had not happened. It was largely the sturdy stone of Three Ravens Tower that reassured him, the way it wrapped around them like the protective mantle of the mountain Ur-Nakiga itself. The ruins of Tangleroot had never felt like more than a broken place, suitable only for a desperate, doomed resistance to the inevitable. Resistance here was no less doomed, Vieki knew, but unlike Tangleroot Castle, this tower still had a roof. Just sheltering in the starless dark beneath it reminded him of his mountain home. It had been a long time since the Hikedaya had felt safe beneath open sky. But there was another factor of reassurance, one that he was only now beginning to understand, and she stood before him, conversing with his master, Yarike. General Sunoku still wore her battle-stained armor, but despite the fierce fighting she had sustained only a small cut on her neck. The line of dried blood made a wandering stripe down her throat, then disappeared into her breastplate, like a road on an antique map. Her pale eyes showed no trace of the exhausting week past. In numerous skirmishes fought with Northmen scouts as she led the survivors to Three Ravens Tower. Vieki had a beautiful, clever wife back in Nakiga, but he had never felt anything quite like the fascination that Sunoku evoked in him. Just listening to her firm, quiet voice, he felt as though half their problems were already solved. Vieki's master, however, seemed less convinced. "But we still have most of my builders," Yarike told the general. "It is true we cannot perform the spells of binding, not with the strongest of our singers in such condition." He gestured to host singer Tsayin Ka, who lay senseless on a makeshift pallet a short distance away, tended by two of her acolytes. Her pale skin had darkened into bruised shadows around her eyes, temples, and throat, and her every ragged breath sounded like it came with terrible effort. "But what Tsayin Ka and her order cannot do by songs of binding, mine can do to these walls by skill and application. No, it is pointless trying to defend this place for long," said Sunoku. "We must return to Nakiga as quickly as we can." Nakiga? Yarike allowed himself a tone of measured irritation. You said there were no sacrifices or other fighters left in Nakiga, General. That means our only choice is to hold this part of the wall until the mortals give up and go home. A few months at most. The winter will drive them out, even with the Storm King banished to the lands beyond the Veil of Death. Vieki wondered how they would feed themselves. The fields between the wall and the mountain were empty, burned by years of frost and neglect. Some of their people had not eaten in weeks, but he said nothing aloud. The problem remains, Yarike continued. You command the last of our warriors, General. There is no defense for the innocents in Nakiga if we fail or falter. I said there were no fighters in Nakiga when I left, High Magister, Sunoku said. But they were trickling back. The survivors were scattered widely after the Storm King failed and are returning by many routes, some very long and arduous. I myself took 300 sacrifices and members of other orders out of Erkenland and back through the coastal hills of Hernistir, fighting angry mortals all the way. Others are doing the same. She smiled, but it was no more than a slash in her pale skin, a bloodless wound. No, we must return to Nakiga. Word of our defeat in the south has given the human creatures courage. These Rimmer's men may be the first to come against us, but they will not be the last. She made a gesture of negation. Now, attend me closely. If we try to hold this wall, we will fail. But at the same time, we must hold it, at least for a little while. Vieki did not understand her. Neither did his master, it seemed. The Magister narrowed his eyes, but spread his fingers in the sign that meant, I am listening. We must hold this wall long enough for most of those with us now to return to Nakiga, she said. Nakiga is where we must make our stand with whatever forces and weapons we can assemble. Even though the Queen slumbers in the grip of the Keteyindra and cannot defend us, you know as well as I that we have not entirely exhausted our resources. There are things in the lower levels. Dreadful things. Yarike cut her short with another gesture. How can we accomplish this, General Sunoku? I admire your order of sacrifice, but this tower is meant to be held by a garrison of 100 at least. In time of desperation, we might have that. It is said that the great Rizayo held Midwinter's Sun Tower and the wall against an army of giants with but 24 sacrifices. But with all due respect, none of us here are Rizayo Falcon's Eye, nor even the metal of his 24. I will task each sacrifice I leave behind with remaining alive until they have taken the lives of at least 10 mortals, the general said. With the help of a dozen or more of your builders, I think this tower can be held until the rest. A strange croaking sound interrupted her. Sunoku turned, as did Vieki and his master, Yarike. Tsayin Ka, the host singer who had given her all to make the fires speak at Tangleroot Castle, was now struggling to sit up. Mistress, no! Cried one of the singers who had been tending her. He bent to help Tsayin Ka lie back again, but the host singer grasped his arm and flung him away with such astounding force that he spun halfway across the tower chamber, hit the wall with a terrible, muffled crack, then lay still. Tsayin Ka slowly rose, clumsy, tottering, her limbs as stiff as alder branches. But it was her face that drew Vieki's startled attention. Her eyes had rolled up until only a crescent moon of white showed in each, and her jaw was working up and down soundlessly, chewing at the empty air. I will bring help, shouted the other singer. She is having a fit. You will do nothing, were the words that came from Tsayin Ka's gnashing mouth, each syllable thick and misshapen. Vieki recognized that grating, deep voice. It did not belong to the dying host singer at all, but to someone far more frightening. Sunoku drew her great sword, Cold Root, and leveled it at the thing's breast. The blind, upturned eyes could not possibly see the gray blade, but Sayin Ka's slack lips suddenly curled in a smile that made Vieki feel ill. My, but we have grown important and impressive, said the scraping voice. I always knew you had the seed of greatness in you, Sunoku Pt.4. Speak your peace, thing of the outer darkness. The general raised her witchwood blade as if to keep the stumbling, loose-limbed singer at bay. Then be gone. You sully the body of one who gave her all for her people. Vieki was astonished. Despite his master's favor, Vieki was still an outsider compared to a high noble like Sunoku, but even he knew the voice of Akinabe, Lord of Song, when he heard it. Akinabe, second in power only to Queen Utuku herself. How could the general not recognize it? Upstart! I speak for the queen, rasped the voice out of Sayin Ka's slack mouth. You and the others are to hold your position. Under no circumstance are you to return to Nakiga. You will defend Three Ravens Tower to your last breath. Sunoku lifted Cold Root high, took a sudden step forward, and crashed the pommel of her famous sword against Sayin Ka's forehead. The singer's knees buckled. Then she dropped like a sack of winter meal. In the shocked silence that followed, the acolyte who had been tending Sayin Ka scuttled forward with a look of helplessness on his face, as if all his training had been burned away in an instant. He turned the host singer over, but whatever had animated her had now fled. The center of her forehead was pushed in like a broken eggshell. You've killed my mistress, he said in wonder and horror. Sayin Ka is dead. A regrettable result. General Sunoku sheathed her sword and bent to examine the body. I used more force than I intended, but perhaps it is a blessing. The thing that possessed her could not have been driven from her dying body any other way. What thing? The acolyte singer had lost more than his discipline, Vieki decided. He had all but lost his mind if he thought he could defy an armed superior. Did you not hear the voice of our master, of Lord Akinabe himself? Sunoku gave a pitying shake of her head. You were fooled by a dark spirit, singer. Look at your comrade. She gestured to the singer Sayin Ka had flung away, still lying in an awkward, broken-necked sprawl at the base of the chamber's stone wall. Do you mean to tell me that Lord Akinabe murdered one of his own singers for no reason? The acolyte's mouth worked, but for a moment nothing came out. Vieki was fearful that this one, too, would begin speaking with that terrible, scraping voice, but at last the acolyte managed to mutter, I do not know what to say, General Sunoku. She turned to Yarike and Vieki. Do you think it a coincidence that moments after I revealed my strategy, something slipped into the body of Sayin Ka to demand we not return? High Magister Yarike, am I wrong? Yarike again wore a strange expression. Vieki could almost imagine his master was hiding amusement. But all the Magister said was, I can see no fault in your reasoning, General. Commander Hayano and several of his sacrifices now hurried into the room. All but Hayano stopped short, staring at the body of Sayin Ka. What has happened here, General? He asked. A deadly trick. Perhaps the work of the Zidaya traitor who traveled with the mortal army. But it has failed. Assemble all of your men except the sentries and those on active patrol. With High Magister Yarike's permission, I will speak to them. Hayano looked to Yarike. He was better at masking his confusion and doubt than the acolyte Singer had been, but his hesitation was clear to all. You heard your general, said Yarike at last, all surface now, his private thoughts once more hidden behind a wall that needed no sentries to keep it inviolate. Of course you must follow your orders. More than 200 sacrifices from almost a dozen different troops had crowded into the great high-raftered hall of Three Ravens Tower. They stood straight, ignoring their many wounds, faces set in masks of resolve. Two torches at either end of Marshal Ekisuno's makeshift bier cast the only light, except for the summer star, Reniku, burning in the center of the hall's high window like a diamond shining from the ashes of a fire. My foreparent Ekisuno lies before you, Sunoku began, pointing to the marshal's shrouded, unmoving form. Though the general's voice seemed soft, it carried to all parts of the chamber. He was of the blood of great Ekimeniso himself, our queen's consort, and, like his ancestor, Ekisuno was a mighty warrior. He spent his long life fighting the queen's enemies before he died at the fall of the Tower of Azua, as did so many others. You know what happened. All of you were there. The torches reflected the gleams of hundreds of pairs of dark eyes watching her. Less than 100 great years ago, the first mortals came into our lands, savage, dangerous creatures in numbers ever swelling. But when we would have scoured them from our soil, our cousins, the Zidaya, prevented us, saying, "They are but few, and the land is big enough for all." You know the tragedy that came from their foolish forbearance. You know how mortals killed Druki, the son of our great queen, and that was only the first of the outrages they have visited upon us. They were the wedge that split the two kindreds of the Kedaya, and although for a time we both lived in uneasy peace with the newcomers, it did not last. During the lifetimes of most of you here, the first of the bearded ones came over the sea with weapons of black iron and hearts full of hate. Like locusts, they devoured all that they touched, destroying even their own kind in their bloodlust and fury. Then the Zidaya learned to their sorrow the folly of their patience with these short-lived, swift-breeding animals. The last of our people's great cities fell when Inaluki of the Zidaya was destroyed trying to defend Azua against the invaders. Only mortal kings, their hands red with blood, our people's blood, have sat on Azua's throne ever since. Here the general suddenly stopped and fell silent, as if some new thought had occurred to her. The assembled sacrifices, their myriad gazes following her as one, stared raptly at the slender, bright shape in silver-white armor. Did I say the last city of our people? Sunoku asked. That is not true. One great city remains, one refuge of the people of the garden, and that city is Nakiga, our home. Beyond this tower, just outside the boundary walls of our land, waits an army of mortals. And not just any mortals, but the very same bearded northerners who destroyed Inaluki and Azua, who laid waste to Hikahikayo and drove out the last of our people there, who left a trail of our blood across all the lands that once belonged to us. Now, They mean to bring down these walls, too. They will swarm in their thousands all the way to Nakiga itself, now all but undefended after our defeat in the southern lands. The sacrifices were stirring, still following Sunoku's every word and gesture. It felt to Vieki as though he stood in the middle of a hornet's nest, and someone had begun to shake it. "Will we hold the wall?" she asked. "The answer is we must, if only for a short while. But we cannot hold it for long. The shaking earth of a few seasons back has weakened it, and if every single one of us laid down our lives here, still we would hold back the mortals for only a short time. In a few days or weeks, a changing of the moon's face at most, our defense would fail before their numbers, and they would sweep past us to great Nakiga itself. And what would they do there?" Sunoku's voice became quieter, but no less forceful. "When they took Azua the first time, a horror that is within the memory of most here today, the mortals killed every living thing within its walls. Nor were those deaths swift and merciful. Do you think they will do any different if they take Nakiga?" Now the sacrifices were openly murmuring, some clenching and unclenching their fists. Vieki was astounded. The discipline of the fighting order was legendary, and General Sunoku had broken it in moments. For the first time in his life, Vieki wondered if his people's eagerness to be ruled by a greater power than themselves might in truth be a sort of weakness, in the same way that overhardened witchwood lacked flexibility, and thus was more easily broken. "Make no mistake," Sunoku continued, her noble face as grim as her words. "The mortals will rage through our city like a giant in the field of stone flowers, smashing everything. They will destroy every monument to the lost garden, every precious memorial to our sacred martyrs. But what they do to the living will be worse. Your families and clans will fall before them like sheep caught by a pack of ravening wolves. Your daughters and wives will be raped and then murdered. No one will be spared. When they have finished, Nakiga will be a fit place only for bats, beetles, and helpless ghosts." Now she spoke slowly, each word a painful spite. "They will pull the queen herself from the Keta Yindra, where she lies helpless after the last battle in the south, and they will take her and burn her. The mother of us all will die in agony, and the last living memory of the garden will disappear from the earth. Because we cannot hold this wall. We are not strong enough. The fortifications are not strong enough. And there is no help coming from Nakiga. We are alone." And slowly, deliberately, Sunoku turned her back on the warriors and hung her head as if in final defeat. The murmuring died away, but for a few noises that might have been strangled sobs. Then, out of the silence, a single voice spoke. It was Hayano, and the rage and pain in his words made even Vieki, who thought little of the commander, ache inside. "Is there nothing we can do, then?" Hayano demanded. "Nothing at all? Why do you tell us this, General? Why do you set our hearts afire and then leave them to burn?" A moment, a long moment, and then Sunoku made the gesture for attention. It was only for effect, Vieki knew. All eyes were already on her. "Yes, there is one chance, one unlikely chance." "Tell us!" cried Hayano, and although no one echoed him, it was clear from the shuffling and hand signs of agreement that he spoke for all the sacrifices gathered. Vieki could feel their desperate fury, a rage that now made the very air tremble as if a storm was imminent. "We cannot, in any case, hold this wall or this tower for long," she said. "But if enough of us can make it back to Nakiga, especially the builders here, it is possible we can shore up the mountain's defenses sufficiently to keep the mortals from victory. The great gates of Nakiga have never been breached by mortal or immortal. Even the queen herself could not take it by force when she first came there, but had to be welcomed in by its citizens. The gates of Nakiga are strong, and we can make them stronger still, but we need time. Can you do that? For our queen? For the garden? We can do anything," Hayano shouted, and at last a chorus of agreement broke from the ranks. "Tell us, General! Tell us what we must do!" She stared at the eager throng for a moment as if considering. Moved, despite his moments of doubt, Vieki found himself leaning forward, half hoping she would ask him to join the warriors in sacrificing themselves to save their queen and city. "High Magister Yarike," the general said at last, "will you choose a dozen of your engineers to remain behind and help with the defense? They will not return to Nakiga, but they will be promised a place of glory in the tales of this time, and I promise this time will be remembered as long as the garden itself is remembered." Yarike wore his most solemn face. "I will ask for volunteers, General Sunoku, but one way or another, you will have your dozen. Thank you, High Magister." Sunoku looked to the assembled sacrifices, who had grown almost downcast when she turned away, but who were now all attention once more. "And what of you, my warriors? Which of you will offer your lives here and now for the chance that Nakiga may live? I need 100 volunteers to stay, and each must give me his or her sworn vow to send at least 10 mortals into the darkness before the end comes. How many will do this? Which of your names will be told and retold until the sun itself is consumed by the black emptiness at the end of time and the great song finally ends? Show me your swords!" More than 200 blades leaped from their scabbards as one, a chiming scrape of witchwood and bronze so harsh and loud that Vieki nearly put his fingers in his ears. Every sacrifice had lifted his sword. "I expected no less," Sunoku said, nodding. "The queen, were she here, would smile to see her brave children." She turned to Hayano. "League Commander, you will take charge of the garrison. Choose 100 sacrifices, favoring those who are older or without families. And do not insult those now standing guard upon the walls by excluding them from the chance to fight this glorious fight." "I hear you, General," said Hayano. His narrow face flushed at cheekbones and temples, as if he had run a long distance through the cold. We will hold this wall to our last beating heart. We will make you proud." "You already have," she said. "Your death songs were sung long ago. The celebrants have already written down all your names. Now you can give those deaths in perfect glory for our queen and our race. And I promise you, in return, that those of us who must go to defend Nakiga will give every last breath we have to honor your sacrifice and save our people. For the garden! For the garden! Echoed hundreds of voices, including Vieki's own. He was surprised to discover that his eyes were brimming. He did not even know when the tears had begun. And I think that's probably a good place to stop for the night, since it's actually a stopping point. Anyway, thank you for bearing with me as always, and very nice to see you all with me. I'm sorry I don't ever get a chance so that I can read these things. I think what we'll do one of these times is we'll have a night where instead of reading, I'll just run things up and we'll have conversations and questions and tell stories and stuff like that. So, but don't worry, we'll finish this book first. I'm not going to cheat you guys of a reading night because there's still, God, how much? Goodly amount. Yeah, about 2/3 of the book still to go. So we want to get that finished. And because all the cool stuff happens near the end too. Well, not all the cool stuff, but much cool stuff. Molto coolio. Anyway, so since it is now 8 o'clock Sunday night, my time, here on the wonderful, wild, wacky western coast of America, full of all the crazy Californios, I am going to go and rejoin my family, such as they are. They think they're my real family. They don't realize they're an experiment. But anyway, so I want to thank you very much, as always, for joining me. It's a great pleasure to be able to do this, and especially with such nice people. Be good to yourselves. Be good to your family and loved ones. Be good to your friends. And do something nice pretty much for neighbors and, just people. Because we all need each other. That's very important. We are social animals. We are like dogs and baboons and all those kinds of critters. We may mask it by some of the things we do, and we may have not noticed it in some ways, but we're definitely social animals. We need each other, and we need to be good to each other, and then the whole herd, tribe, pack, flock, whatever it is, can get along doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, which is eating grubs and picking fleas off each other's backs or whatever it is that herd animals do. Anyway, so lovely to see you guys all as usual. Many, many good wishes and muchos muchos from the Beale Williams Rancho here in the California Hills. I hope you are all going to be back with me next Sunday. I'll be doing the next bit of this reading, 2 o'clock in the morning my time, and then another one 6 days and 23 hours from now at 7 p.m. as per usual. And with that, I say thank you, good night, and